Dragon. Dragons are massive, flying reptiles that can breathe fire. They are rumored to have a strong connection to magic, which seems to be proven true when magic begins to return to the world after the birth of the first three in over 200 years. Dragons possess awesome and devastating power, capable of laying waste to armies and burning entire cities to ashes. Men who were able to tame and ride dragons as beasts of war used them in battle and to forge vast empires across the continents of Essos and Westeros. The greatest of these empires was the Valyrian Freehold forged by the Valyrian dragonlords. Aegon I Targaryen and his sisters used the last three surviving dragons in the world to conquer and unify the 7 kingdoms of Westeros. For generations, the Dragon Kings ruled over much of Westeros, but the dragons eventually died out after nearly a century and a half, and the species was subsequently considered to be extinct. At the same time that the War of the 5 Kings began in Westeros, Daenerys Targaryen was in possession of 3 petrified dragon eggs. They were given to her as a wedding gift, beautiful to look upon and valuable beyond comprehension, but otherwise useless. However, in a shocking display of old magic, Daenerys miraculously hatched the eggs and for the first time in generations, dragons filled the skies. Dragons have long serpentine bodies, with proportionately long necks and tails. Their bodies have 4 limbs, 2 short back legs and 2 large wings as forelimbs, a body plan similar to a bat. In later generations, after the dragons went extinct, physical descriptions of dragons became so confused in memory that artwork sometimes depicted them as having 6 limbs, 2 wings growing out of their backs in addition to 4 legs, but this is inaccurate, at least in Westerosian legend. The teeth and claws of adult dragons are as long and sharp as swords. Dragons are covered in scales, as well as spines that run down their backs from head to tail. Particularly large ridges of horns framed the edges of their faces, running along the back of the skull and along the jawline, which grow bigger as they mature. Adult dragons possess 2 sets of frills that run along the backs of their necks and spine, 2 along the sides of their necks and another 2 centered closer to the backbone, for a total of 4 frills. These are formed from webbing that grows between longer spines. When dragons are agitated, or simply excited, they raise and flare these frills, similar to how a furry animal like a cat will raise the hackles on its back when agitated, or a feathered animal such as a goose will puff up its feathers, in an attempt to appear bigger so as to intimidate its enemies. Dragons are also shown to have a variety of calls, from shrieking roars to low growls or hisses. They can even squeal. Dragons are obligate carnivores, with diets consisting entirely of meat. Dragons need to roast their prey with their fire breath before consuming it, the only animals apart from humans who prefer cooked meat. Dragons can eat almost any kind of meat, anything from sheep to fish. Historical dragons ridden as beasts of war were known to eat fallen horses and even men on the battlefield. Fully grown dragons could swallow a live horse whole. Color variations. The scale color of dragons is highly variable, and historical dragons ranged in color from black to silver, red, gold, and even blue. Some dragons were one solid color throughout, but more often, they tend to have one primary color for most of their body, with highlights in a secondary color along their spinal crests, horns, and wing membranes. Confirmed markings observed so far include black with red markings, green with bronze markings, cream with gold markings. In addition to the various scales hues observed between specimens, dragons also displayed eye color variations. Dragons being reptiles, they had vertical slit pupils with large colored irises. Drogon and Rhaegal have red eyes while their brother, Viserion, had green eyes before becoming a white. Fire breath. Probably the most famous attribute of dragons is their ability to breathe fire. Dragon flame can turn flesh to ash, melt steel, and crack stone. Older dragons can produce a more intense flame for longer durations. The bodies of dragons are also very resistant to fire, particularly their own flames, which will not damage their own mouths as they expel them. Some believe that in many ways dragons are fire given form as flesh. It is said that fire cannot kill a dragon. Dragons seem to produce their fire breath by expelling chemicals out of 2 tubes either side of their mouths. When these volatile substances combine, they undergo an intense reaction which bursts into a directed jet of fire. Later in the series, this idea seemed to be abandoned. There are several shots where fire is seen emanating from the dragons' throats, not out of the tubes in their mouths. During the Battle of Winterfell, flames leak from the neck of the undead Viserion after he suffers injuries from his brother Rhaegal. Reproduction. Like most reptiles, dragons lay clutches of eggs. Dragon eggs are roughly the size of a human child's head, and as heavy as stone, so they need to be carried with 2 hands. The outer shell is covered in scales, with vastly different color patterns between eggs, usually matching the color of the dragon inside. Dragon eggs are notoriously difficult to hatch, though they can maintain the spark of life inside of them for decades if not centuries. The secret key to hatching the eggs seems to involve some form of blood magic, as the house words of the Targaryens hint, it requires fire and blood. To hatch them, dragon eggs must be burned in roaring flames, with which another creature is simultaneously being burned alive, a life in exchange for a life. In the wild, this might just be a prey animal that the parent dragon kills, but human sacrifice will do the trick quite nicely, particularly if there is more than one egg to hatch. The exact details of dragon reproduction fell out of living memory in the nearly 2 centuries since they died out. Several conflicting theories and rumors have been circulated, some less grounded in fact than others. It is unclear if the mother guarded eggs she had laid, or simply left them to hatch and fend for themselves, or if the father aided the mother in caring for them. Dragons were apparently relatively solitary creatures, though it is unknown if any hierarchical relationships formed within groups of dragons. Dragons, like birds, tend to imprint on whoever is present when they hatch, regarding that person as their parent. Maturation. Newly hatched dragons are about the size of a small cat, but they grow very rapidly, reaching the size of a small dog in about 1 year, and the size of a small pony in only 3 or 4 years. The rate at which specific dragons can grow varies from one to the next, but in some cases dragons can grow big enough to ride after only a few years. It is unknown at what age dragons reach reproductive maturity. Dragons never stop growing as long as they live, and they can live for centuries, though many died in combat before reaching such an age. The largest Targaryen dragon, Valyrian the Black Dread, lived for nearly 2 centuries and had a skull the size of a carriage. However, if dragons are chained or confined into an enclosed space for long periods of time, it can hinder their growth and their overall size. Rhaegal and Viserion, who hatched at the same time than Drogon, were considerably smaller than their sibling, around half his size, after being locked under Meereen's Great Pyramid for almost 2 years at an early stage of their development. When dragons hatch, they do have horns around their faces and along their spines, but they are still quite small and relatively rounded. Their horns grow increasingly longer and sharper as they mature, quickly making the dragon appear more dangerous and menacing to prey or other dragons. The 4 lines of webbed frills along a dragon's spine only grow to a prominent size after they are about a year old. The bigger the dragon is, the bigger its appetite. When a dragon reaches adolescence, roughly when they are the size of a pony, they tend to be rebellious to a degree, much like how human teenagers are, even snarling at their imprinted parent. However, as they mature, this trait disappears. Training and riding. Dragons cannot be truly tamed, but they can be bonded with and trained. Humble Valyrian shepherds were the first to control them using magic, and rode dragons for millennia. Aegon I Targaryen and his sister wives, who descended from Old Valyria, used the last 3 dragons in the world to conquer and unify the 7 kingdoms. Dragons are fairly intelligent animals, and like a horse or a dog, they can be trained by their rider to respond to basic voice commands. Tyrion Lannister claims that dragons are intelligent, much more so than most people, and will quickly recognize friend from foe. If they are not trained, they will quickly lay waste to anything around them. The key to training dragons is making sure they are well fed. A dragon with a full stomach is more obedient. Since they cannot be truly tamed, dragons can be very dangerous even to their riders. However, they can form very strong bonds with their riders and will show affection and trust towards them. They will even nuzzle their riders, hoping to be petted. Daenerys Targaryen has trained her 3 dragons to respond to vocal commands in her mother tongue of High Valyrian. She often uses the command, Dracarys, to which her dragons respond by instantly breathing fire and burning anything in their path. History. The first known dragons were mentioned to have their lairs in the 14 Fires, a chain of volcanoes across the neck of the Valyrian Peninsula. The Valyrians, then peaceful shepherds, tamed the dragons with magic, even learned how to master and ride them as beasts of war. Thus they began expanding their influence from the peninsula to the rest of their continent, forming the Valyrian Freehold. The dragons gave the decisive victory in the Giscari Wars, during which the Old Guise is burned to ashes by dragonfire, and the ever-expanding Freehold replaced the Giscari Empire as the dominant culture of Essos. The Rhoynar under Nymeria fled to Dorne, having no chance against the Valyrian dragons. 400 years before the War of the Five Kings, the entire Valyrian Empire was destroyed in a single day, during a cataclysmic volcanic eruption known as the Doom of Valyria. Most dragons, still layering in the volcanoes, were killed outright. One Valyrian noble family, the Targaryens, survived the doom on the distant island outpost of Dragonstone in the Narrow Sea, along with the last surviving Valyrian dragons. The last surviving dragons in the world were possessed by House Targaryen, the last Valyrians after the Cataclysm, who used them to conquer and unify the 7 kingdoms of Westeros 300 years before the War of the Five Kings. Most of the Targaryen dragons died in a civil war known as Dance of the Dragons about a century and a half later, and after that, the only dragons the Targaryens had were the size of cats. Soon after the civil war ended, the last Targaryen dragons died, and the species was considered to be extinct throughout the world. In the series, the dragon species is established as having been extinct for many years. The only thing left of the race are petrified dragon eggs, which are used as decoration, and the bones which are used for weapon crafting. According to one legend, dragons originated from a second moon that hatched when it drifted too close to the sun. This is mostly dismissed as a simple myth. They remain the sigil of House Targaryen, who were known to have a special affinity with the creatures. Even Daenerys Targaryen, who knows nothing of her true heritage, feels a connection with the relics of the ancient animals. She appears to feel a connection with the eggs, causing her to develop a curiosity about the race and the possibility that there may still be living dragons. Daenerys is given 3 petrified dragon eggs as a gift for her wedding to Khal Drogo. The 3 eggs are black, green, and gold. Daenerys begins caring for the eggs as they become richer in color. She keeps them in a chest surrounded by candles, day and night, as she is drawn to them. Arya stumbles upon the massive skull of one of the Targaryen dragons while chasing a cat in the vaults. She hides in the mouth of the skull and overhears the plotting of Illyrio and Varys. Daenerys continues to experiment with her eggs. She briefly places one of the eggs into a fire pit in an attempt to hatch it, but the egg remains unhatched. She removes the egg from the fire with her bare hands, but remains unhurt. Daenerys Targaryen places the eggs on the funeral pyre of her husband after smothering him with a pillow. She also straps the witch Mirri Maz Duur to the pyre. She then lights the pyre, and walks into it, with all her followers believing her to have burned alive. In the morning, however, she is found with 3 dragons, a green dragon in her arms, a black dragon clinging on her shoulder and a white peach-colored dragon clinging on her leg. A moment later, the black dragon screeches and flaps his wings. Daenerys tries unsuccessfully to feed her dragons raw meat, unsure of what she is doing wrong. Later, in Qarth, she realizes that they will only eat cooked meat. She coaxes them into recognizing the Valyrian command, Dracarys, to breathe fire, so they can cook their own food. During her stay in Qarth, word of the dragon's return begins to travel to other parts of Essos. The rumors are eventually picked up by Varys, who mentions them to Tyrion Lannister. Tyrion is more concerned with the impending Battle of the Blackwater than with newly hatched dragons on the other side of the world. The dragons are later stolen by the warlocks of Qarth and hidden in the House of the Undying. The warlocks and Xaro Xhoan and Daxos carry out a coup to seize control of the city in the wake of the theft. Pyat Pree invites Daenerys to come to the House of the Undying and be reunited with her babies. Once Daenerys is inside the citadel, she is enthralled by 2 specific illusions: the Iron Throne Room with a destroyed roof and snow falling in, and the illusion of her dead husband and child. The sound of the crying dragons pulls Daenerys out of the temptation to stay in either illusion. Continuing her search for her dragons, she finds them all chained beside each other, and they scream with excitement when she nears them. Daenerys goes to them, only to find herself chained as well. With her arms stretched to either side of her, she becomes a captive. However, with a bit of a twisted smile, Daenerys speaks the High Valyrian word for fire, and Drogon first answers her call, but isn't very effective by himself. However, both Rhaegal and Viserion then join in, setting Pyat Pree ablaze. Daenerys arrives with her dragons in Slaver's Bay, hoping to acquire an army of Unsullied. With nothing else to pay the slave masters, she offers them her largest dragon, Drogon, in exchange for all 8,000 of their Unsullied soldiers. However, the deal is a ruse. After slave master Krasny's Emo Naklas gives her the whip signifying ownership of the Unsullied army, the dragon remains loyal to her. Revealing to everyone that she speaks Valyrian fluently, she orders her new army to slay all of the slave masters within the city. Daenerys then commands Drogon to attack Krasny's. The slave master is consumed in a powerful jet of Drogon's fire breath. Drogon and the other dragons then provide air support for the Unsullied as they sack Astapor, burning more of the slave masters and their personal guards. Afterwards, Daenerys's new army triumphantly leaves Astapor marching in formation, with her 3 dragons flying above. In Season 5, Drogon is about 40 feet long from snout to tail tip, and 20% bigger than the other 2 dragons, making them around 32 feet long. In Season 5, several dragon traits were copied from different real-life animals: Komodo dragons, iguanas, horned lizards, and crocodiles. The dragons' physical motions were derived from eagles and bats, while, for their takeoff into flight, pelicans were used as a reference. Joe Bauer stated that in Season 6, the dragons will double in size yet again, which would make Drogon roughly 80 feet long, and the other 2 around 64 feet long. In Season 5, to give the actors a better prop to react to, instead of just dangling a tennis ball and pretending it was breathing fire, the special effects team took the extra step of custom building a fire-breathing crane. They began with a techno-dolly, a motion-controlled crane with a 15-foot-high arm that moves in different directions while its base rolls along a track, with a telescopic arm that usually holds a camera. The crew then took the camera out, and in its place mounted a flamethrower that could shoot as far as 50 feet. The crane was then programmed with Drogon's movements, so it could repeat the same sequence over and over again for multiple takes of the same shot. Thus the stunt team, actors, and directors always knew exactly where the dragon and its fire was supposed to be. After filming finished, digital artists then added Drogon's body around the real flames in the shot. A second method they used in Season 5 was the simulcam system. A basic animation of the dragon would be saved on the camera monitor and imposed over what it was pointed at, so the cameramen and directors could always see where a dragon was supposed to be moving in any given shot. In the books. In the A Song of Ice and Fire novels, dragons are described as 4-limbed creatures, with 2 legs and 2 wing arms. In English and Scottish heraldry, this creature was more often called a wyvern, and dragons were distinguished as 6-limbed creatures, with 4 regular legs and a pair of wings sprouting out of their back. George R.R. Martin relied on both science and folklore when constructing his dragons, and as he and other fantasy authors have pointed out, in terms of real-life physics, it would be far more difficult for a 6-limbed dragon to actually fly than a 4-limbed dragon. Also, since all known terrestrial vertebrates, i.e. animals with backbones, are tetrapods, animals with 4 limbs, it makes more evolutionary sense to have the dragon's front limbs modified into wings, as with birds, bats, and prehistoric pterosaurs, instead of evolving an entirely new set of limbs from nowhere, which would be a biological impossibility. In the books, the bones of dragons are black due to their high iron content. In the TV series, the skull Arya Stark sees beneath the Red Keep is shown to be white, through the dragon bone handle on her dagger is black. Dragon bone is especially favored for making bows, as it is stronger and more flexible than wood, making the arrows fly much farther. Dragon bone is also fireproof, giving it another advantage over wooden bows. Dragons, like certain species of reptiles, amphibians, and fish, have no fixed biological sex. They can shift between male and female to meet the reproductive needs of the species. For example, only the 5 dragons possessed by House Targaryen survived the Doom of Valyria. If they were all originally female, some would have shifted into males so they could continue to breed with each other. While some real-life animals, mostly fish, certain frogs, are capable of shifting from one sex to the other, it is always a one-way and irreversible process. In contrast, according to Septon Barth and Maester Aemon, A Feast for Crows, Samwell 4, dragons can switch sex back and forth over the course of their lives, as mutable as flame. Dragons in male or female state are visually indistinguishable, apparently possessing no external sex organs. The knowledge that dragons can shift sex was lost after the Doom of Valyria. However, during the first half of the Targaryen dynasty's rule over Westeros while they still had dragons, people apparently just assumed a dragon was male unless it was observed laying eggs, after which they assumed it was always female. In Fire and Blood, Archmaester Gildane dismisses Barth's speculation that dragons can switch sex as nonsense, and also the possibility that Vermac secretly laid a clutch of eggs at Winterfell, simply because it was never observed laying eggs before or since, so it was assumed that Vermax was always male. Dragons which frequently laid eggs were assumed to be she-dragons, and sometimes called queens, Malays the Red Queen, and Tessarian the Blue Queen. Dragons considered female/confirmed egg-layers included Vhagar, Dreamfire, Silverwing, Malays, Syrax, and Tessarian. Growth. According to Valyrian records, dragons hatch small, about the size of an average cat, growing larger as they age and as their appetites expand, Physically, a dragon never stops growing as long as it remains fed, and it was said that Valyrian the Black Dread, Aegon the Conqueror's dragon, was so huge by the time he died that he could swallow an aurochs whole. Dragons can have extremely long lifespans, but Barristan Selmy states that it isn't known for certain how long the average dragon lives before dying of natural causes. This is largely because dragons were originally trained and used as weapons of war, and thus usually died of violent unnatural causes. Valyrian may well have been the only Targaryen dragon that grew to healthy adulthood and simply died from old age. Feeding. Something of a joke throughout the novels is that dragons seem to prefer sheep as their main food, though they will eat any animal smaller than themselves if they are hungry enough, apparently a reference to the myth of St. George and the dragon. The ancient Valyrians who first trained and rode dragons were shepherds, and as such fed sheep to their mounts. At Meereen, Daenerys's dragons often attack the flocks of local shepherds. In an effort to placate Drogon after he breaks loose, various animals are assembled in local fighting pits to try to keep him well fed enough so that he won't attack any more humans. One pen is filled with bulls, and another filled with a wide variety of exotic animals from across the world, lions, tigers, bears, etc., which were meant to fight in the pits. But even with this wide selection of potential meals, Drogon still prefers to go after the pen filled with sheep. This may be a reference to the real-life myth of St. George and the dragon. Villages being attacked by a dragon placated the beast for a time by leaving it fresh sheep as tribute, though eventually they ran out of sheep, and had to start sacrificing young maidens. Vulnerabilities. Aside from their ability to breathe fire, dragons were ferociously strong. They were, however, vulnerable to sustained arrow fire from the ground, to poison, and to attacks from other dragons. According to Tyrion, A Dance with Dragons, Tyrion 11, who has read books on the subject, a dragon's eyes are its only real weak spot, not the throat or underbelly as old wives' tales claim, and that the only certain way to kill a dragon is to pierce its eyes deep enough to puncture the brain behind them. Meraxes, Rhaenys Targaryen's dragon, was killed in precisely this manner during a conflict with the Dornish. Only other dragons are strong enough to pierce a dragon's scales with tooth and claw. The bottom line is that while dragons were extremely powerful, they were not outright invincible. Also, given their rarity and the large effort/expense in training them, they were not simply deployed in battle on a whim. Even Aegon the Conqueror was reluctant to commit all of his dragons to a single battle, for fear that they might be overwhelmed by greater numbers. Thus, Aegon took a calculated risk when he unleashed all 3 of his dragons for the first and only time at the Field of Fire, the battle which secured his conquest. Intelligence. Dragons are very intelligent creatures, at times seeming to approach human levels of intelligence and emotion, but they never specifically display it. Dragons can't physically talk, and although they can understand voice commands from humans, this is no more than what a dog or a horse can do. Rather, dragons appear to have some sort of higher, unnatural level of intelligence. They seem to be more in tune with the workings of the universe, i.e., magic or fate or nature, than humans are, and possess a sense of mental awareness that humans do not. Somehow, they are often able to sense when the human rider they are bonded with needs them, something hinted at in the Season 5 episode, The Dance of Dragons, when Drogon arrives seemingly out of nowhere to rescue Daenerys. Training. While the specific methods used in training them are not widely known at the time of the novels, such information was nearly all lost in the Doom of Valyria. It has long been believed that only those who possess Valyrian blood, such as the Targaryens, can bond with and ride dragons. This may be for the simple reason that the Valyrians were the first to accomplish this feat, and dragons do seem to be inherently friendlier around people with at least some Valyrian blood. This may also be a reason for the dragonlords' infamous tradition of incestuous marriage. If their Valyrian blood became too diluted by marrying and reproducing with outsiders, their control over their dragons would become less stable. The dragonlords of Old Valyria were known to control their mounts with whips, binding spells, and sorceress horns. Euron Greyjoy claims to have such a horn, which he calls Dragonbinder. He has given it to his brother Victarion for binding Daenerys's dragons, but it has not been put to test yet. History. The Valyrians first discovered dragons nesting in the warmth of the 14 Fires, a chain of volcanoes on the Valyrian Peninsula, but it is not known for certain where dragons originated. The World of Ice and Fire sourcebook mentions that cultures throughout the known world each have their own legends regarding the origins of dragons. Also, ancient dragon bones have been found in such far-flung places as the island of Ib and on the continent of Sithorios, where the Valyrians never established a significant foothold. Other than Valyria itself, the only plausible origin site for dragons within the known world is Ashai and the surrounding Shadowlands. Dragon bones and petrified dragon eggs are frequently found there, and the inhabitants claim that dragons existed in the region since before Valyria was founded. Ashai also claims to be the oldest city in the world, but no one can confirm or deny this. The question is further complicated by the fact that multiple species of dragons exist, or are said to exist, in different regions of the known world, and there is no evidence to confirm or deny that these species are in any way related to each other. Large flying reptiles known as wyverns are known to exist on Sithorios. Myths and legends speak of ice dragons in far northerly reaches of the Shivering Sea, and the deepest regions of the Sunset Sea are said to be home to enormous sea dragons, such as Naga in the stories of the Ironborn. There is also the possibility that dragons did not originate in any currently explored region of the known world. Whatever the case, the Valyrians were the first people whose interaction with dragons can be historically confirmed, and they succeeded in harnessing the power of dragons as no one else had or ever did. During the conquest of the Rhoynar, the Valyrian Freehold commanded at least 300 dragons and their riders. It is not known how many dragons the Freehold possessed in its final years, but the only ones known to have survived the doom of Valyria were those belonging to House Targaryen, who later used them to conquer the Seven Kingdoms. The Targaryens kept dragons in Westeros for approximately 150 years, roughly half of their dynasty. After the dragons died, their preserved skulls were put on display in the Red Keep. Tyrion states that there are 19 skulls in all, which for a time led to the misconception that there were only ever 19 Targaryen dragons. However, Tyrion also says that the oldest skull is 3,000 years old. The oldest Targaryen dragon was Valyrian, who hatched over 400 years ago and died after living for about 2 centuries. Thus the 19 skulls were never an accurate count of all the Targaryen dragons, and the Targaryens apparently acquired several skulls from Essos. According to information from Martin's other writings, there were at least 24 Targaryen dragons throughout the dynasty's history, and possibly a few more. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.